I'm practicing to take the BU Fundamentals Exam. This video is about a drill that appears in that exam. This is today's drill. On the right-hand side are instructions for setting it up. I'm going to show you my first attempt at the drill. I'm going to show you some practicing that I did to identify weaknesses and make some improvements. And then I'm going to show you my final attempt. At the end, I'll discuss some lessons learned and some things that I need to work on. And with that being said, let's get to my garage. All right, this is my first attempt at this drill. You start out with cue ball in hand, and you have to make the object ball into the side pocket, and then stun the cue ball down to the bottom rail. So this is the starting position. The target starts at what they call cue ball position 4, which is up against the rail. If you make a successful shot, then the target moves 1 diamond to the left. Each time you make a successful shot, the target will move to the left. If you miss, it will move to the right. As I said, you do start out with cue ball in hand. So there's several variables that of course are going to affect whether you're successful on a shot or not. One factor being the cut angle that you choose, speed of the shot, also any spin, follow or draw that you have on the cue ball is going to have an impact, of course. You can see that I'm struggling with my speed control. And this is something that I knew was going to be a challenge on this drill, because before I started this attempt, I had set up the donuts on the table and I hit about 12 or 15 shots just to get a feel for the drill. And pretty quickly, wow, look at that, missed. I was so focused on the speed of the shot that I forgot that I had to actually make the ball. Yeah, but I had just experimented with this drill right before I shot this, and just to get an idea of how the drill worked. And I was really struggling with speed control on this, so I knew that that was going to be a challenge. So I started actually playing around with a couple different variables here as I was shooting this this attempt, trying to figure out how best to control the accuracy of the shot and also the speed. But we'll get into more of that when we get into the practice session. All right, here is the practice session that I did after the first attempt. I was struggling with speed control during the first drill. So as I'm going through this practice session, I'm trying to identify all the factors that have an influence on the results here, both in accuracy and speed. So I started playing around with where do I put the cue ball? And I decided to try to be very consistent with the distance from cue ball to object ball. Also, I tried to set it up so that I was always getting a half ball hit, because that minimizes the variation in the cut angle. And then I started experimenting with where to put the tip. Do I put a little bit of draw? Do I hit center ball? Do I put any spin on the cue ball? Started playing around with different stuff. Then at some point I wander off and go grab a clipboard so I can take some notes as I'm changing variables and figuring out what works well for me as far as being more consistent with my speed control and also accuracy. As I'm going through this, I do identify several factors that really do help me be more consistent. And I will talk more about that in the lessons learned. Guessing some of the same things that I identified are probably pretty common across most players. So I will let you go ahead and watch the rest of this practice session, and then we'll talk more about, well, first then I'll do the final attempt, and then we'll talk about lessons learned. Okay, here is the final attempt. At this point, I had reviewed my notes after the practice session and had made some decisions on locking in certain variables that I wanted to control. So I was feeling a good bit more confident at this point. Some of the variables I logged in were distance where I set up the cue ball in relation to the object ball. The cut angle, I was very consistent from here on out. I had made the decision to use about a full tip of draw for every single shot. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to hold all variables constant except one, which is the actual speed of the shot, the amount of force that I'm using. I actually came up with a little technique to try to control that also. And that'll be something we talk about in the lessons learned section. Yes, I'm shooting significantly better now. Until then, I didn't really stroke that all the way through. Boy, that was a close one. Close, but no cigar. Just missed that one. All right, last shot. Let's hit it. Attaboy. All right, lessons learned. So what did I think of this drill? I thought this drill was pretty difficult. Obviously, potting the object ball is super easy, but it's this shot really puts a premium on your ability to put the right speed on the cue ball, and then also to make sure that you get a very, very accurate tip placement on the cue ball. Because any variation off of that, it really affects the outcome of the shot. So what I tried to do was just to identify and control as many variables as possible. So I tried to put the cue ball the same distance every time from the object ball. I spent a little extra time trying to make sure that I found the exact vertical axis and make sure that I cue on that. That way I would minimize a lot of other variables that you don't want here, which is squirt, spin, a lot of things that will make you lose control of the cue ball. Because when the cue ball comes off that bottom rail, if there's any spin at all, it's going to come off. I also set up every shot so that it would be a half ball hit. And the other thing that I came up with to try to control speed, at least to make it a little more quantitative, is I changed the way that I actually stroke just for this drill. And what I started doing was what I call a gravity stroke. So basically what that means is when I'm stroking, I'm actually not using my arm muscles. What I'm doing is I'm just altering the amount of pullback on my stroke. So if it's a short shot, I pull my arm back just a little bit, and then I relax my arm and just let my arm drop. If I want the cue ball to go a little bit further, I just raise my arm on the pullback, raise it a little bit further, and then relax my arm and just let it drop. So basically I'm allowing gravity to actually perform the shot for me, not my arm muscles. And I found that this actually worked really well. It was much more consistent. Now, of course, I have to be able to hit the targets, I have to figure out, well, how far back do I pull my arm? But once I figure that out, once I calibrate that, then the speed control is almost, it's kind of simple. And hopefully when I take the final exam, I will pretty much nail this drill, I think. I also noticed when I was putting this video together that my right hand was often a little too far forward on my cue, so that when my cue tip makes contact with the cue ball, my forearm was not really straight up and down. It was a little too far forward. So that, again, is something I'm going to try to keep in mind and try to force my hand backwards about an inch, inch and a half when I take these shots. All right, guys, I promised you some drill secrets, and here they are. This is the very first tip. It's really important that you be able to identify what's called the vertical axis of the cue ball. This is a really important concept because if you can consistently hit the cue ball in the exact center or the exact vertical axis, anywhere along that axis, that really helps you minimize variation in your shooting. So it's really, really important. So the way you do this is when you get down on the cue ball, if you are shooting a center ball shot or maybe a follow, just look at the very top of the cue ball and just let your eyes trace the curve of the top of the cue ball. And the very, very, very top is where you're going to find the vertical axis. And it will extend all the way down to the bottom of the cue ball. If you're shooting either center or maybe a draw shot, look down at the bottom of the cue ball and let your eyes trace that curve and let your eyes settle on the point where that curve changes. And it's identified there by the yellow arrow. That will also help you find the vertical axis. So if you cue anywhere on this axis, it really helps you minimize variation. Here's the second secret. This is related to the accuracy of the shot. What I found was for this drill, based upon the speeds I was hitting the cue ball at, about one full tip of draw seemed to be about right for me to counteract the natural tendency of the cue ball wanting to roll forward. And so I was able to get a pretty successful stun shot if I just used one tip of draw. All right, here is the third drill secret. It's the half ball hit. So you may have heard of the half ball hit before. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here, but I decided to use a half ball hit for every single shot. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to minimize the variation in the cut angle. And in other words, the angle that the cue ball comes off of the object ball. I wanted to be that as consistent as possible. And the half ball hit gives you the most consistent return angle from a collision. So it was just, one other attempt for me to try to control variation. And I will talk a lot more about half ball hits in a future video. But suffice to say, for this drill, I think it's probably the best angle to use to reduce variation. And here is drill secret number 4. I started experimenting with a gravity stroke as a desperate attempt to try to figure out how to control my speed here. What I decided to do is just basically get in my stance, set my mechanics up, and then instead of using my arm muscles to actually perform a pull stroke, what I decided to do was just raise my hand up a little bit, like to, let's say, position 4, and then just focus on completely relaxing my arm muscles and just letting my hand and my cue drop due to the force of gravity. And I would see how far that would go. And if I wanted it to go a little bit further, I would just raise my hand a little bit further up. And so basically, if I was shooting and trying to hit a target at position 4, I would just raise my hand a little bit, let my arm drop to execute the shot. If I wanted to go a little bit further, like position 5, I would raise my hand up to about position 5 there on the chart. And then the hardest part is just trusting gravity. It's being able to convince your arm to completely relax and just let gravity take over. What I've found is this actually works really, really well. Now you have to experiment around at first to figure out where those points are in your arm movement. But once you figure that out, once you calibrate yourself, this actually works really well. So I obviously didn't spend the time to master it here for this video, but I'm definitely going to work on this as a way to control speed and to be very, very, very consistent with the speed of my shots. Billiard University was formed in 2012 by Dr. Randy and Dr. Dave, and their goal was to help pool players improve. They do this by providing skill assessment tools and resources that can really help your game. They currently offer 6 different exams for assessing your pool playing ability. But for this video series, I'm just focused on the drills that are associated with Exam 1. There are several benefits of taking the BU exams. For one, you will be able to get a sense of how good of a player you are based on your overall exam scores. Here's an example scale. You can also watch YouTube videos of some of the top pros taking the same exact exams that you can take. And here's a fun thing. Billiard University periodically sponsors contests where you can win money based upon how well you do on the drills. So what are you waiting for? You should also be taking these exams. If you enjoyed this video and want me to make more videos like this, please subscribe. Also hit the like button. Feel free to leave me a comment or a suggestion for future video topics. Stay safe and shoot well.